many political observers expect little change in Ethiopia, despite Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegne's resignation. How a paper pregnancy test aims to cut plastic waste and help vulnerable women. And the smash hit superhero movie Black Panther leaps into box office history. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. Now we begin tonight in Southern Africa, where 17 people are dead in Mozambique following the collapse of a mega-sized mound of garbage in the capital, Maputo. Several homes were crushed. Heavy rains are believed to have triggered the collapse in a poor district of the city. Authorities say a search is ongoing for more bodies that may still be buried at the Huleni garbage dam. According to local media reports, the trash depot was the height of a three-story building. Residents in the area say the huge trash site is overflowing and have long argued for its closure. The Huleni dam is one of the largest in Maputo, and poor people often search through the refuse heap looking for items to sell. After last week's unexpected resignation of Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn, Ethiopia's Defense Minister Siraj Fegasa announced that a state of emergency declared in the country on Friday will last for 6 months. Africa 54's Zawiya had an opportunity to speak with Ethiopia's communications minister here in Washington on the situation in Ethiopia.
The surprise state of emergency followed the shocking resignation last Thursday by Ethiopia's Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn. A day before Desalegne's resignation, key political prisoners, including a prominent blogger Eskinder Nega, were released. However, they all refused to sign a pardon document implicating them with being members of Genbot 7, a banned political organization that's fighting to topple the government. I asked Ethiopia's communications minister Nigere Lencho if their imprisonment was illegal.
The point is not that they were detained illegally. The point is the government wants to make a better future for Ethiopians and want to give those who have been detained for various reasons to play their role in the maybe future, whether politics or whatever role they have in the community.
In recent weeks, outbreaks of protests have spread across the country, with protesters calling for the unconditional release of all political prisoners. Lencho says the government is willing to release the political prisoners for the greater good of the country.
The government has already decided to create a better political sphere for those who want to play politics in democracy. We want all concerned Ethiopians to play their part so that the making of the new Ethiopia will be successful.
Even the Human Rights Commission within the government, not the human rights outside of the government, is admitting that there have been serious human rights violations against the protesters and political prisoners in Ethiopia.
We don't want an individual to be killed as a government, but we have seen mistakes, and whoever commits a crime by killing citizens will be accountable.
Ethiopia's ruling party has admitted that it is weak and that some key members in the party are corrupt. The government has promised reforms. Now, how soon can Ethiopians expect this kind of reforms?
The party should speak the truth about the reality on the ground and about what is happening today. That's why the party admitted that there are corrupt officials, that are rent seekers among the members.
Has any one of those top officials been taken to court?
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. Many of them have been jailed, and there are also others on who the government is just investigating, just working to take the necessary measure.
Since the beginning of the year, Ethiopia has released more than 6,000 prisoners charged with a variety of offenses, including taking part in mass protests and crimes against the state. It has also closed down a jail where the alleged torture of activists took place. Zawiya, VOA News, Washington.
Well, South Africa's opposition is harshly criticizing new President Cyril Ramaphosa's first State of the Nation address, questioning whether he has a concrete plan to solve the nation's many challenges. One day after taking office to replace the unpopular Jacob Zuma, Ramaphosa's speech on Friday outlined big ambitions and challenged South Africans to follow in the steps of the late Nelson Mandela. But Monday's parliament session gave the opposition an opportunity to poke holes in his vision.
President, we want to say to you that you are not a king. You are a leader of the people. And therefore, you must never expect a treatment of a king. You must be a leader. You must welcome those who criticize you and always defend the right of those who disagree with you to disagree with you. You must not abuse your power because you think you are powerful like that.
Well, in Parliament on Monday, 40 speakers from the ruling African National Congress and the opposition debated the finer points for much longer than Ramaphosa's original 90-minute State of the Nation address. And while the first few days of Ramaphosa's administration has seen little real change in the way of policy, however, he has a chance to refute the criticisms on Tuesday as he appears in Parliament to address and refute points raised in Monday's debate. Now to East Africa, where peace in South Sudan remained fragile. The country's warring factions signed a new agreement in December 2017 to cease military hostilities and protect civilians. The ceasefire aims to revive a 2015 peace deal that collapsed in 2016 after heavy fighting broke out in the South Sudan capital, Juba. The ceasefire, however, appears to be at risk of collapsing as the warring sides continue to be accused of violating it. So what are the prospects of lasting peace in South Sudan? For some perspectives, I'm joined in studio by Early Verji, a visiting fellow at the United States Institute of Peace and a researcher specializing in the politics of East Africa. Welcome to the studio, Mr. Verji. Now, first, the peace deal looks shaky. Is it shaky because they are violating it, or is it just shaky because it's weak?
It's shaky because it hasn't managed to resolve the underlying reasons for conflict in South Sudan. And following its collapse in 2016, there has been a lengthy layoff before peace talks have resumed, and that's only just started, as you mentioned, in December and now again in January and February.
What is it in that peace agreement that makes it difficult for them to implement and leads us back to where South Sudan has come from, the same disagreements, the same fighting?
I don't think ultimately it's about the terms of the agreement. It's more about the political will to undertake some of the difficult things that it contains. So actually decentralizing power and reducing the power of the executive, actually considering security sector reform, all of these things have been very, very difficult in practice to achieve.
Power sharing was seen as the hope. And we saw what happened in 2015. There was that power sharing deal. It fell apart, and in fact, people went back to war. Why is that not attainable? It doesn't seem to be.
Well, the parties both wanted power sharing in the previous peace talks, and that's what the mediation then introduced. It didn't work, and therefore it's upon the mediation now to say, well, it didn't succeed before, we need to look at other alternatives, other solutions.
Okay. So up to this point, it looks like the past is not a very good model for what should happen in the future. Right. What would be the best way moving forward?
Well, power sharing isn't necessarily and inherently a bad thing, but the same model of power sharing is problematic if it isn't changed, if it's exactly the same as what was entertained in 2015. More decentralization of powers is important. More oversight is important. South Sudan faces economic and humanitarian crisis, and none of that is addressed by power sharing.
Now, it seems like the South Sudanese leadership, both in government and the opposition, seem to be looking outwards for the best solution, and they blame external forces for the failures. What is it that perhaps they need to come to terms with in terms of their role in ensuring there can be lasting peace in South Sudan?
Well, ultimately, they have to put their objectives behind those of the objectives of the people of South Sudan. There have been national processes as well. It's not that there are only external international processes, but time and again we see a lack of commitment, a lack of sincerity in actually moving forward with the commitments that are made in these peace talks. And in terms of taking that back to South Sudan after you leave the negotiating hall, there's very little evidence that's really what's happening.
Now, without this kind of the willingness of both sides to really kind of implement the letter and the spirit of any of the deals that they've come up with, what is the option? What do South Sudanese citizens do?
Well, that's a difficult question. I think the first thing to say is that adjourning peace talks when there isn't a prospect of a deal isn't necessarily the right approach, because what it signals to people is that there is no political avenue whatsoever and fighting is the only way forward. But in terms of what people can do, I think there's a genuine belief amongst some of the elites that they have support amongst their people for what they're doing, no matter how difficult, how intransigent, how much violence it creates. And it's really important if people can actually say that isn't the case, that actually we want our basic needs, food, water, education, and so on, to be satisfied rather than to have an endless war.
Some people have suggested that perhaps the best way is to take out the current leadership, both in government and the opposition, perhaps have a new crop of leaders to negotiate the new peace deal.
I don't know if that's realistic in the short term. The reality is that there are many people who are implicated in the current conflict. It's a generational issue as well. Certainly, some of the people who are in power do need to look at the examples from elsewhere in the continent and say, maybe enough is enough. Maybe that's the right time. And that is part of the answer. I don't think it's the whole answer.
Wow. Well, still hoping for the best in South Sudan. Thank you very much, Mr. Verji, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Now, Ali Verji is a visiting fellow at the United States Institute of Peace and also is a researcher specializing in the politics of Eastern Africa. Back to the south of the continent, Zimbabwe's opposition leader Morgan Tsvangirai was buried on Tuesday in his rural home of Buhera. Before his body left Harare, it was given a heartfelt send-off by thousands of his supporters. Tsvangirai died last Wednesday at age 65 after a long battle with cancer. Presidential, parliamentary and local elections are due within 6 months, and without Tsvangirai, the Movement for Democratic Change Party appears to be in disarray to the advantage of the ruling ZANU-PF and its new leader, Emmerson Mnangagwa. Now, want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered? Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Makori. Now, coming up, meet Aliyah, the Flushable pregnancy test. Stay with us.
This is a country that I chose to become a citizen. I didn't have to become a citizen. I chose to become a citizen.
I feel like America gave me an opportunity to pursue my passion as an artist.
I really believe that clean eating is a way to a more successful life, or a happier life, if you want to put it that way.
One of the things that helps me wake up every morning is doing better, being better.
We grew up poor, and so I'm always focused on helping the working class be able to have a more comfortable lifestyle.
I'm passionate about doing justice every day. I oftentimes say that justice is a verb, not a noun. You know, I believe in action and moving the ball forward.
Well, it's time now for a health report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lenon Mudu with an update on cholera in Southern Africa.
Malawi's Ministry of Health says the number of cholera cases have increased to more than 520 from 157 recorded in January, and that deaths have doubled from 4 to 8. According to the ministry, new cases continue to emerge in central and northern Malawi districts, including the administrative capital, Lilongwe, where 10 new cases were recorded over the weekend. Meanwhile, in Zambia, health authorities say the cholera epidemic continues to slow, with 7 deaths recorded over the last month. 85 people have now died since the outbreak of the disease in October, and more than 4,200 cases have been recorded. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation recently released its 2018 annual letter. The letter reveals the progress and challenges in global health and development and addresses some frequently asked questions regarding the foundation's work. I spoke to Hadi Stadis, Ethiopia's country director for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and asked him the significance of this year's annual letter.
This year's letter focuses on 10 tough questions. It helps us sort of examine our work more closely and be transparent about what kind of things we're involved in.
Would you tell us about some of the questions that related to Africa?
At least 4 or 5 questions, maybe even 6 questions out of the 10 are actually relevant to Africa. Those around values, about overpopulation, about how we work with business and the influence that we have are very relevant questions to Africa.
What are those values?
Behind the question is probably, and I'm speculating here, is probably the idea that, you're Western, you're Americans, are you trying to impose Western or American values on people in Africa?
Okay.
And the reality is actually not that. What we care about, what we work on, are actually values that Africans care deeply about. We're talking about survival of children. We invest heavily in preventing diseases like malaria, TB, diarrheal diseases on children. We help farmers produce enough food to, support themselves and take the excess to markets. We believe mothers should not die giving birth. We believe HIV should not decimate our communities. So these are not, American or Western cultures. I think there are values that we as human beings share.
How does this reflect in Ethiopia?
As you know, Ethiopia has a very large population, over 100 million people. And the disease and poverty burden in Ethiopia is fairly large. Although Ethiopia has made tremendous progress over the last 15 years or so, we still have a lot of people who require assistance or who can benefit from some intervention. So we work particularly in health and agriculture sectors. In the agriculture side, we work with smallholder farmers to support them to produce more outputs. And try to link them to markets both locally and internationally. So we're about sustainable productivity in the agriculture side. On the health side, we really focus mostly on mothers and children. So the survival of children under 5 and mothers is important to us. But then there are some other diseases, killer diseases like malaria and TB and HIV and some diarrheal diseases. And we think these are things that Ethiopians and Africans in general are trying to address. And, while we're providing significant support, we're a fairly small player in the biggest, thing. The biggest, contributors to this are usually government. And then if you take the donor landscape in general, they put a lot more money than we do. So we think we have the ability to support some interventions in these areas, and we continue to do that.
Now, taking an in-home pregnancy test can be stressful for some women, and some say one of the challenges is how to discreetly dispose of the test and its results. Now, there is Leah, a pregnancy test that can safely disappear with the flush of a toilet. VOA's Trina Turin has more.
Bethany Edwards and her coworkers spend a lot of time with pregnancy tests.
We all peed on a lot of different things.
Edwards and her co-founder have created Leah, a new and improved pregnancy test.
We've invented the first flushable, biodegradable pregnancy test, and it's FDA cleared, so we're really excited about that.
Like traditional pregnancy tests, Leah analyzes urine for the presence of pregnancy hormone HCG and claims a 99% accuracy rate. But unlike those tests, it's made of paper instead of plastic.
We're really bringing together, a solution that is better for women, but also better for the planet.
Its creators say Leah breaks down like toilet paper and can be flushed in standard flow sewer or septic systems.
And we really had to develop our own coatings, proprietary coatings, to allow the paper and the material to hold up in use, but also be able to break down quickly after you're done. You want something that has rigidity and structure, but then after you're done with it, doesn't, and is able to become flimsy and separate in water.
A flushable test also means the experience can remain private.
Lots of women tell their stories about, hiding pregnancy tests in trash cans, taking them in public restrooms.
I think that a discreet pregnancy test can empower women and empower people to be able to take a test without worrying about outside interference. And that has the potential to further engage them with the reproductive health care that they need after that.
Cost is another important factor.
Oftentimes I hear that pregnancy tests can be expensive. Patients who have poorer access to reproductive health care services, cost can be a barrier.
Leah will be available in the third quarter of 2018 and sell for between $7 and $8. Tina Trin, VOA News, New York.
And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter @LenorMoudou. Vincent, back to you.
Well, Lenore, thank you very much. Now be sure to watch Lenore Moudou's health reports every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. It's a mega hit. Black Panther makes history. We'll be right back.
And we started off with a walk.
Mr. President!
75. That's
Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. A wave of feverish anticipation, critical acclaim, and groundbreaking cultural meaning pushed superhero flick Black Panther to a record $192 million debut in U.S. and Canadian theaters, firmly establishing the superhero sensation as a box office landmark. The Marvel film blew past expectations to become the 5th highest grossing debut ever, not adjusting for inflation, following only Star Wars: The Force Awakens, Star Wars: The Last Jedi, Jurassic World, and The Avengers. Well, next up, the concept of farm to plate is nothing new, but what about wall to plate? The Good Bank restaurant in Berlin is now growing its salads on its walls and harvesting them in front of customers before plating them up. It's part of an urban gardening trend gaining more and more in popularity around the world. Good Bank does not use any pesticides, and the salads produced are fresh since they are literally taken from the wall and served onto the plate a few minutes or hours later. Food production and the food industry in general are topics which often generate heated debate. It's hoped growing what a customer will eat in front of them will help build trust. Well, and finally, a century-old train station in North China has embraced modern smart technology in order to aid passengers in the world's largest annual human migration. Among the upgrades, interactive robot Little Huan. It can lead passengers to a variety of places and provide a wide range of travel information. More upgrades include face scanning, tech, more phone charging facilities, and a new ventilation system. A big data center was also built to provide three-dimensional monitoring and surveillance of passenger flow. And that's what's trending today. Now, Black Panther is a certified Hollywood blockbuster, raking in more than $200 million in North America during its opening weekend, setting several records. The film's success comes as no surprise to the fans that packed theaters on the south side of Chicago to celebrate a film that marks a welcome departure from the Hollywood norm. VOA's Ken Farabaugh reports.
9-year-old Akila Jaco has not yet watched Black Panther, but she already knows something about the movie.
There is a black superhero. There's a lot of people like us, and there's a lot of black children in the movie.
Jaco was among hundreds of students from the Betty Shabazz International Charter School that turned a showing of Black Panther at the Studio Movie Grill Theater on Chicago's South Side into a celebration of African culture and heritage.
We want to see this. We support this. We encourage that more of this is accepted.
Taheera Cartman says it's long past due for such a film.
It's 2018. We've had a black president. We shouldn't be just still having slavery movies. You know, we've seen those stories. We need to see more positive stories.
This film is a major departure as far as the types of roles that black actors are given and the types of storylines that we see black characters in the midst of.
Professor Blair Davis focuses some of his classes at DePaul University and his own study on the impact of comic book characters on pop culture. He believes Black Panther will be remembered as more than just a superhero film.
The best films, I think, we remember because they say something bigger. They say something about who we are as people, and I think the cultural aspects of Black Panther are what are going to allow us to remember it in years to come. So I think that it will succeed on its own merits as an action film, but I think that thanks to the talent of Ryan Coogler, that this will have a lasting value as this sort of perhaps sea change in Hollywood.
It's a vision of black people in power and of black people having control over their own destiny.
Carol Lee is one of the founders of the Betty Shabazz International Charter School.
We're an African-centric school.
She says while Black Panther is a fictional film, it reinforces what they teach.
It's tapped the spirit, and that's why people are coming out in such numbers, bringing their children, dressing in ways, cultural ways of affirming. Yes, we are very clear about who we are.
It's definitely affecting the way our children, you know, see themselves and affect who they want to be and who they look up to, who they aspire to be. All of that definitely matters.
For Akila Jaco, even before she took her seat to see the film for the first time, Black Panther was already teaching her an important lesson.
You know, it says, like I said, like anything's possible.
It is also possible Black Panther could become one of the highest grossing films of all time. Kane Fairbaugh, VOA News, Chicago.
Well, that's our show for today. Now be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings today, Break Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us here, have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. You know the difference between a left foot and a right foot. But what does it mean if you say someone has
2 left feet?
Maybe our 2 friends, Anna and Jonathan, can help us?
Jonathan, what happened to your head?
Well, I've been taking these dance lessons with my new friend.
Were you dancing on your head?